Welcome and welcome back, everybody. Tia here, and in today's video, I have another set of 5 disappointing games. Y'all know the drill, but it's been a while, so in case you missed the memo, these are not necessarily bad games. They're games that, for whatever reason, there was a certain expectation of how they would go down, of the quality of game, and in some form or fashion that they did not fulfill those expectations. So this is a highly subjective list, and as always, I will be providing a swath of alternatives if you have similar feelings, or perhaps you like these games and want to try more like them. So without further ado, let's get started. First up on our list is a game from one of my favorite designers, and that is Scott Alm's Dicey Peaks. This is a push your luck style game where players are going to be rolling dice and competing to climb up the mountain while preserving their oxygen. Now, it sounds like a cool premise, and it seems like it could be a really quick, fun, easy game to get into. However, I think even playing this with a younger audience or non-gaming audience, unfortunately, there's not a lot to go off of here that makes the game really engaging and intriguing with some interesting decisions. It's just kind of rolling dice and seeing what happens. So while I do love the theme of this game, I'm partial to winter themes. There are other push your luck games that I think fulfill this same kind of feeling and a little bit better. 2 of the ones that come into mind that are very similar are Oink Games' Deep Sea Adventure or Mayday Games' Hold Your Breath. Both of these games feature kind of the opposite of Dicey Peaks, where instead of climbing a mountain, you're diving down to try to get lower and lower to get different types of treasures and maintaining your oxygen that way, coming back up to the surface. So it's kind of the inverse of Dicey Peaks. And if you're looking for something that's in this vein of push your luck games with the travel element and that has some player interactivity where you're competing with other players to see how far you can go to bring back more treasures, I would definitely recommend Celestia. It's a little bit heavier than any of these titles, but it's still very light and a great party game with some really unique strategy and, of course, gorgeous art. Next up on the list is a game that features dice manipulation and beautiful art, 2 things that should be a really good combination, and that is King of 12. I played this recently at a convention. I had been intrigued by it because of the really gorgeous artwork and because the premise seemed very simple and quick and to the point. I thought it could be a very fun little filler game, but really you're just playing cards to manipulate your die and trying to get the highest die, unless a card says otherwise. And it featured a lot of elements of changing things up, like I've seen in some trick-taking games where you might not want the highest die, or you might not want to win every time. Maybe you hold your cards into the next round, but when it really comes down to it, it was extremely light. It didn't even feel like a filler game, maybe a game for very, very young children, but then the art skews a little bit older than that, so it was kind of confusing. If you're looking for a game that has some deeper strategy that still fits within that filler realm of things and you want to roll dice and manipulate them in order to collect sets and score points, I would definitely recommend checking out Unearthed. This is one of my all-time favorite games. It's one of my most played games, and it still has elements like King of 12 where you can play cards to manipulate dice, but instead of just having the highest die, you are placing dice out onto ruins and trying to have the highest die value once the dice collectively reach a certain threshold. So there's quite a little bit more going on there. If you were looking for something more in that vein, definitely check out Unearthed. This next game on the list comes from a very successful line of games. This is actually the flip and fill style version of the game, and that is the Isle of Cats Explore and Draw. I really enjoy Isle of Cats. It's not necessarily one of my favorite games, but as far as polyomino games go, it's one that I can definitely recommend, and if people want to play it, I'm usually always down because it's quick and to the point. The Explore and Draw version, however, took away the one thing that made me really love Isle of Cats, and that is the drafting. In the original Isle of Cats game, you have kind of 2 different sets of drafting that are happening, which makes it really interesting as far as drafting goes, because not only are you drafting cards, which will give you lessons that can help you score points and priority for picking, but then you're also drafting tiles from the central pool based on your initiative and how many baskets you have and how many boots you have for how quickly you can get to the island to grab cats. So that Double layer drafting is pretty interesting and it's not too convoluted. I thought that perhaps the Isle of Cats Explore and Draw would have something similar to that, or at least one level of drafting, even though it's a boiled down version. But unfortunately, you're just placing out a grid of cards and everybody can select whatever they want, which was a little disappointing since the main game relies so heavily on those drafting mechanics. Now, not to say that some of my other favorite flip and fills or roll and writes don't have that same thing where it's pretty much just a solo game and everybody's using the same resources to try to create the best arrangement on their boards. But in this particular instance, it didn't feel as engaging as some of those other games do. So as an alternative to Isle of Cats Explore and Draw, I would say if you like the theme and the idea of Isle of Cats, it is a little bit more pricey. It does take up a little bit more table space, but if you can just get the original Isle of Cats, I would definitely go for that and stick with it. If you're looking for a flip and fill style game that has Tetramino style pieces, then I would definitely recommend Cartographers. And again, here, even though everybody's using the same resources or the same card that comes out and drawing it onto their board, the scoring objectives are a little bit more clear and unique from the beginning of the game. And there are different things that you can do and different choices you can make with each card that you take. So overall, this tried to capture the essence of Isle of Cats, but it left out some really important factors that I think made it a swing and a miss for me. And next up on the list, we have a game from one of my all-time favorite publishers. I'm sorry to say, but A Perfect Moment, which has been released through Button Shy Games as well, did not satisfy any sort of interest for me. This is a kind of back and forth hand management game where you have cards that you're going to be playing and trying to get larger numbers and collecting different items that match. It was just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The cards that you got felt very random, and it didn't feel like as a player, I had a lot of agency over that. That can be difficult to do with just 18 cards. However, I've seen so many other Button Shy games be able to do this. And for sure, it's not an easy thing to do, but in this case, it wasn't a very engaging experience to play this game. So if you're looking for some really awesome solo or two-player games, you can for sure check out a lot of the other Button Shy titles. In fact, I made a video about some of my all-time favorite Button Shy games featuring a lot of really great solo and two-player games that have a small footprint, just like The Perfect Moment, but slightly different mechanics that made me feel as a player I had more agency over what was happening and could make some strategic choices. So I'll put a link up in the card for that, and you can check that out right after this. And last but not here on this list today, we have a game that I'm sure some of you have probably heard of either in its first form or its newly released form, and that is Return to Dark Tower. This is a cooperative style game where you are going to be combating different monsters and events that come out from this central monolith. And this game features some really heavy app integration. I know people have very mixed feelings about app integration. I am not necessarily drawn to games that utilize it. However, I will admit that there are some games where the app integration is very smooth and doesn't detract too much from the gameplay to where it's an assist to the board game and the focus is still on the table versus in the app. For Return to Dark Tower, I kind of felt the opposite because resolving different events and all of the combat relied on this mechanism. Not only that, the app dictated the tower, which would like turn on its own and do different things. You would have to remove certain components, and based on that, you would input and different things would happen, like skulls would fall out of one area or the other, etc., etc. So it's a game that, and it's the way that it's designed and implemented, could not work without the app. I think it's an interesting idea, but it did feel a little bit gimmicky. And although the rest of the production quality of everything was very high, I felt that this was a very entry-level cooperative game. And it could be a cool, flashy piece to show off, but if I'm being completely honest, the gameplay itself and the decisions you can make felt more geared towards a younger audience. It's definitely a game where if you have somebody who knows the game a little better or who is more familiar with these cooperative style games, that you could definitely have an alpha gamer type situation. And the other thing that was not my favorite about this game was for the weight of the game and the level of immersion, it just felt very long and drawn out. So I definitely think there are other games in this vein of cooperative style games that I particularly enjoy. If you're looking for something that has a darker theme that's really chunky and really satisfying in terms of cooperative games, then I would definitely go ahead and check out either Dead Men Tell No Tales or Ghost Stories. Both of them have this kind of brooding overall atmosphere, and they have a cooperative play style that plays very similarly to Dark Tower, but without an app and with some more interesting strategic choices and challenging decisions. And if you're looking for something that's more on the entry-level side in terms of cooperative games, then I would definitely recommend checking out Matt Leacock's Forbidden series. My particular favorite is Forbidden Desert. And again, it has a lot of the similar mechanics of managing events, managing moving around a board, and all of that kind of thing, but in a very family-friendly, condensed down, and well-designed package. So for some people, this kind of middle ground app-assisted game might be great, but for me, I would rather go one way or the other with it, something lighter that's to the point, or something that if I'm going to invest the time and invest the effort, that it has a really satisfying game arc to it and a really great payoff. So there you have it. 5 more disappointing games. And as always, I'm sure you already have, but if you haven't, let me know in the comments down below whether you agree with me or not. And if you have any other alternate recommendations for these games, we would love to hear them. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye. In terms of just an entry into cooperative gaming, then I could definitely suggest